At the 11th hour, on the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, silence finally fell. After 4 long years of thunder and death, the guns went quiet. Across battlefields soaked in sorrow, soldiers wept, hugged, and prayed. The Great War, the war that was supposed to end all wars, was finally over. Before we dive into this moving chapter of human history, take a moment to subscribe. Because understanding where we came from helps us honor those who paid the price for our peace. Stay with me till the end. Today we'll uncover not just how the Great War ended, but what it truly left behind. It was early morning, November 11th, 1918. A cold mist hung over a forest in Compiègne, France. Deep inside that forest, in a modest railroad car, exhausted men gathered around a wooden table. They weren't just diplomats, they were survivors of a nightmare that had consumed the world for more than 4 years. At 5 a.m., representatives of a broken Germany signed an armistice with the Allied powers. The terms were clear: all fighting would cease at 11 a.m. That left 6 agonizing hours between the signing and the silence. For those still fighting on the front lines, those hours felt endless. Some died just minutes before peace officially began. Imagine that. Dying at 10:59 when the world was about to breathe again. When the clock struck 11, church bells rang across Europe. In London, Paris, and New York, people poured into the streets, embracing strangers, singing, crying, and dancing. For the first time in years, hope was louder than artillery. But beneath the celebrations lay a deep wound, a wound the world would never fully heal. The Great War, as it was then called, had taken an unimaginable toll. Over 9 million soldiers were dead. 21 million more were wounded, many scarred for life, physically and mentally. Entire generations of young men had vanished into muddy trenches and nameless graves. Germany, Russia, Austria-Hungary, France, and Great Britain each lost nearly 1 million or more soldiers. Behind those numbers were fathers, sons, and brothers who would never return home. And it wasn't just soldiers who suffered. At least 5 million civilians died, victims of starvation, disease, and exposure caused by the endless strain of war. Towns were shattered, families displaced, nations crippled. The face of Europe was forever changed. The modern world had never seen destruction on such a scale. Machine guns, poison gas, tanks, and aircraft had turned battle into slaughter. The world had become more technologically advanced, but also tragically more efficient at killing. When the dust settled, people hoped, desperately, that this would be the last war. Politicians called it the war to end all wars. The phrase wasn't just hopeful, it was a prayer. The horrors of the trenches, the cries of the wounded, the endless funerals. Surely humanity would never allow this again. But as history teaches us, peace isn't simply the absence of war. It's the presence of justice, understanding, and balance. And when peace is built on bitterness, it rarely lasts. In 1919, world leaders met in Versailles, France, to draft the peace treaty. The result was one of the most controversial documents in modern history, the Treaty of Versailles. On paper, it ended World War I. In reality, it planted the seeds for World War II. Germany was forced to take full responsibility for the war. The treaty demanded enormous reparations, payments so huge that Germany's economy would collapse under their weight. Its colonies were taken away, its military was drastically reduced, and its pride was crushed. The German people felt humiliated. They hadn't even been part of the negotiations. Instead, they were handed the treaty and told to sign, or face invasion. Imagine a nation already shattered, now burdened with guilt and poverty. It was a recipe for resentment. And out of that resentment, 2 decades later, a man named Adolf Hitler would rise, promising revenge and revival. While politicians argued over borders and reparations, ordinary people faced the true cost of war. Millions of soldiers returned home, physically alive but emotionally broken. They called it shell shock back then, what we now know as post-traumatic stress disorder. Men who once sang patriotic songs now woke up screaming in the night. Families struggled to understand the invisible scars. Streets were filled with amputees and widows. Cemeteries stretched beyond the horizon. Every city, every village had its own story of loss. Even the victors felt hollow. Victory had come, but at what price? France's beautiful countryside had turned into wasteland. Britain was drowning in debt. And across the ocean, the United States, though stronger than ever, had lost its innocence. The end of the Great War also marked the end of empires. The mighty Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, German, and Russian empires crumbled, giving birth to new nations and new tensions. Borders were redrawn, often without understanding the people who lived there, sowing seeds of conflict that still affect the world today. The League of Nations was formed to preserve peace, a noble idea, but too weak to enforce it. Countries talked about disarmament and cooperation, yet deep down, fear and distrust lingered. Technology, once used to kill, now began to shape civilian life. Airplanes, radio, and medicine advanced rapidly. The world wanted to move forward, but shadows of the past followed close behind. Every year on November 11th, the world pauses to remember that moment, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. In the United States, it became Veterans Day. In Britain and the Commonwealth, it's called Remembrance Day. Across nations, people bow their heads for 2 minutes of silence. Red poppies bloom on lapels, symbolizing the blood that once soaked the battlefields of Flanders. It's not just about history, it's about gratitude. Gratitude for peace, for freedom, and for the millions who never got to see the world they died to protect. The Great War teaches us that peace is fragile. It reminds us that pride and vengeance can destroy nations, but empathy and understanding can rebuild them. We live today in the shadow of their sacrifice. The comforts, the freedoms, the very world we take for granted, all built on the lessons learned from their suffering. And perhaps that's the true message of November 11th. That silence, after so much noise, carries meaning. That remembrance is not just looking back, but looking forward, determined never to repeat the same mistakes. At 11 a.m. on November 11th, 1918, the world exhaled. For a brief moment, humanity stood still, united in relief, grief, and hope. The Great War ended, but its echoes still whisper through time. Every soldier's grave, every faded photograph, every silent poppy reminds us that peace is not given, it's earned, and must be protected every single day. So the next time the clock strikes 11 on the 11th of November, pause, remember, and whisper a quiet thank you to those who gave us the gift of peace.